The following is a presentation of Surprise Church. El siguiente programa es la presentación de la iglesia Surprise.
Welcome one and all to Christmas at the Movies. Aren't you glad you're here today? I thought I would use a clip off of National Lampoon's Christmas. How many of you have actually seen the movie? There are parts, it's hard to find a clip in there that's actually, clean and without some humor in it, but I think we found one. Hey, turn to your neighbor and say, it's all about Jesus. Go ahead, tell him. The light of the world. And now turn to the other neighbor and say, there's a little Griswold in all of us. I mean, how many of you have tried to outdo your neighbors with lights? How many of you wish you could outdo your neighbors? Oh, they put some on their trees. We're going to put them on our trash cans. You know what I'm... In your face, neighbors. But, I want to talk to you today about some cool things because I believe we have a surprising God, a God who is full of surprises for us. And this God longs to open them for us. In the Bible that some of you have on your mantle, some of you read, they're on your phone, I have to tell you there's a lot of dirt in there. In the Bible, there's a lot of dirt. A lot of people did a lot of bad things in there. Have you realized that? The Bible is not a book of perfect people. The Bible is about people like you and me. And doesn't that help you when we try to quantify God and we try to bring Him here, that we realize that He's here for us too, because don't we all have a little dirt in our lives? Isn't that the truth? Today I want to talk to you about the surprises of God, because God surprises us so many times. I remember years ago my parents praying so hard. We had just moved to White River, South Dakota, and there was like 9 kids in our family in like a 2-bedroom house. They just stacked us higher. The more kids they had, they just put more beds in the room. I'm telling you what, they would start the potatoes on this end of the table, and it just would not make it down to us littler kids. You know what I'm talking about? And so now when I get a chance to eat a lot of turkey, I take advantage of that. Am I alone today? No. But they were praying because there would be a teen camp coming up for the older boys, and they thought it was really important that they go to camp. But my parents didn't have the money. My dad took a job there at a church in White River. He made $35 a week, and we paid our own utilities. Isn't that crazy? With 9 kids. To this day, I look back then and I think, we had 3 millionaires in our church that weren't willing to give. Isn't that crazy? You go, what was that about? So my parents began to pray, and they believed God. So they always got milk at this place outside of town. There was this big dairy operation, and this day they walked into that place, and Mrs. Hitchings was her name. And she served them the milk. They came in those great big Tupperware. Remember those? Big old Tupperware, like 15-gallon. They were just made for the Hockett family. And, we had a refrigerator that was like 30 feet tall just to hold the milk. So she brought that out, and she said, Reverend Hockett, I have something for you. So she went back into behind the curtain, and she came out with an envelope, and she put it in my dad's hand. My dad thought, what is this? And, you don't look at it right when they're there. You go, does she have a note for me? Do we have a bill? Whatever. But my dad was leaving, and as they hopped in the car, they opened up this envelope. And do you know there was exactly the amount they were praying for in this envelope to send the 3 boys to camp? Now, you may not think that's a real big thing, but I do, and they did. And they thanked God for that. And God showed up that day, and He opened up a surprise for them. Some of you, over the holiday, you read about a surprise that was opened up for a particular man, and he's all over the internet right now. Well, it actually started with a lady named Kate. Kate McClure was her name, and just a young lady in her 20s, and she's traveling along just, several weeks ago in the city of Philadelphia, And at the most inopportune time, her car ran out of gas. It was in the most horrible part of Philadelphia. She's a woman. It's nighttime. Doesn't know what she's going to do. She doesn't have a cell phone with her. She hops out of the car, locks the door, and starts walking toward the gas station when she runs into a homeless man. Wouldn't that be disturbing a little bit for you? Well, the homeless man stood up and he had some things to say to her. And one of the things he said is, "Woman, get back in your car. This is not a good part of town. You get back in your car and lock the door and I'll take care of things." So she hopped back in the car and she watched the homeless man walk off. Pretty soon he came back with gas. She found out later that he had spent his last $20 on gas for her. He put the gas in the car and tapped the car and said, "Woman, God's blessings be with you." She's off. She made it home, told her husband about it. They hopped back in the car and went back down and found Johnny. Johnny was down there sitting where he was sitting. From that day on, they began to bring him food and they began to bring him clothing. Found out that Johnny was actually an ex-Marine who had served in the United States Marine Corps. So she had a bright idea. She went home, and because of Facebook connections, she set up a GoFundMe account for Johnny. Within the first few hours, she was able to report to him that they made $1,500. I watched the news, and he said, "This is going to change my life." $1,500. He had moved to Philly with savings, had means, spent it all, couldn't find a job, ended up on the street. Now $1,500 was going to make the difference for him. That's not all. Because by the time they got on the news with Kate, just like Thanksgiving Day, she was there to report that they'd raised $130,000 for this homeless man. And I checked it just before I came here this morning, and that GoFundMe account's up to $300,000. Surprise. That's what God does. Just when you don't think it, He does it. Just when you're out of means, He shows up. Just when you're crushed beyond belief, God shows up with His surprises. Well, today we're going to talk about the surprises of an old guy, very old guy in the Bible. His name is not even hardly known. His name is like Abraham. Does anybody ever heard of Abraham in the Bible? It's just not known. No, in fact, Abraham is known throughout the whole world. Do you know the Muslims call Abraham their father? Did you know that? Did you know the Jews call him their father? Do you know the Christians call him that we're grafted onto the branch of Abraham? 3/4 of the world of 7 billion people call Abraham their father. Isn't that crazy? And we're going to talk about him a little bit today because right now his name's It's Abram. He hasn't even had a name change yet. So it says here that he returned from defeating Chedorlaomer. Great name for a king, by the way. The Big Cheddar. Don't you love it? And the kings aligned with him. The kings of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Sheva. That is the valley of kings. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, he brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of God Most High. And he blessed Abram, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High." Isn't that awesome? Creator of the heavens and the earth. "And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Wait for it, wait for it. Then Abram gave him a tithe of everything that he had. Back then it was customary to give the gods something, no matter which gods you served. If God showed up and He did something for you, then you gave something to Him, and that was called a sacrifice. In this, Abram, he didn't miss a beat. He said, "You can have 1/10 of all my cattle, 1/10 of all my children, 1/10, well, maybe not children, but how many of you would like to give your children away sometimes? I tell you what, crazy kids. That's why I got the gray hair. Okay, we will not go there. But we do love grandkids. Grandkids are our payback for what our kids did to us. But anyway, he gave him 1/10 of everything that he had, and so God opened up at least 3 surprises for Abraham. or Abram at the time. The God of surprises called Abram out of the Ur of Chaldees first of all. He was in the Fertile Crescent, where they say that humanity started. Imagine that. Scientists say that's probably where people came from. Well, that was right around 3 rivers that flowed together, which was called the Garden of Eden. We knew this all along. That's where life started. But Abraham, he lived there, very intelligent man, when all of a sudden, God, Most High, came and talked to him. He said, I'm going to take you to a land that I'm going to show you in the Ur of Chaldees to do something no one had ever done before. I'm going to start something new, and this something new is going to go through you. Don't know how I would take it. Back then, families were very, very close in a cluster. Like at Thanksgiving, there'd be everybody's relative because everyone was related. Anyone from a small town here knows that everyone's related in a small town, and you don't talk about the Joneses in town because if you talk about the Joneses, then these people over here whose last names doesn't even sound like Jones say, well, that's my cousin. Don't you mess with us. You know what I'm talking about? My goodness. God wanted to start something new through him. There was a new land involved. He was going to show him a place that he'd never been before. Abraham didn't even want to leave, but God had something for him. He said, this is going to be a really cool land that I'm going to show you. I'm going to give you a brand new promise. In fact, Abraham, through you, I'm going to bless the world. And he's kind of done that, hasn't he? He said, I'll give you a new covenant. All the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you, Abram. And then I'm going to give you a new name. I don't like the old name Abram. I'm going to give you the name Abraham. Abraham, which means he is a father of many people, is what that means. And it kind of sounds like Abraham or Elohim, which is God's name. Not exactly, but very, very close. So I'll give you all of these things. So the history in this, when we come to look through the window and see what Abraham is doing, we see that he is definitely leaving the country that God has showed him, and he's leaving with his nephew Lot. He's bringing along Lot. Because of Abraham, Lot became very, 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 very rich. Now, how rich was Abraham? They say in today's standards, with what he had in that day, he would have been the richest man double over of any rich man you see today. Millennials, richer than Mark Zuckerberg. He didn't even have the internet. He just had the sheep net. Oh, that was bad. So sorry. You see, he brought Lot along. They became very rich. Lot now had a lot of sheep, and he had a lot of sheep. They had a lot of linens. They had a lot of linens, and they were like going back and forth. And he had a lot of servants, a lot of servants. He had a lot of workers, and pretty soon those workers began to get together and say, I like Lot better than Abraham. No, I like Abraham better than Lot. Well, my dad's bigger than yours. I got a bigger dog than you got, and my dog could eat you. You know how that goes among sheep herders. They were overgrazing this, and so Abraham came to Lot and said, you have to split up. And so Lot decided to take all of the lands of the plains, which included the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And pretty soon, Lot, he left his people out there in the valley with all of his riches, and he and his family moved into the city of Sodom. So now we have a guy named King Chedorlaomer, who you saw in the scripture. He was the king of the cities of the whole region. And he had a very strong ego problem. Know anybody like that? He wanted to conquer everything. Not only was he over the 5 cities that were around that, he wanted to conquer other cities, and so he went out on a conquest to conquer those cities. They called it a slaycation. He went on slaycation, took his sword up, and he was going to kill people to prove that he would be ruler over them. But while he was away, something happened. The group that he was in charge of began to fight amongst one another. Chedorlaomer come back from war, and after he came back from war, he saw that they were fighting, and so he said, I can't handle this. I've got to squelch this this quell that's going on among my people. So he went and he began to pillage all of these villages around there, and especially the town of Sodom. And guess who lives in Sodom? The nephew of Abram. His name is Lot. He takes all of the stuff and he says, oh yeah, grab that guy and his family too. Not maybe knowing who he was. Wrong decision. They took them and they put him in jail. Put his family in prison. Word got back to Abraham. They went into this city and they took Lot. He says, no, not Lot. I'm going to go get him. So he took a little bitty army with him, and little bitty is an understatement. This army was only 318 people. Against all of the armies that Chedorlaomer had who just conquered nations, they took 318 people. The God of surprises, he opened up a second one. He helped Abraham to defeat this powerful Chedorlaomer with 318 people. Kind of like the 6-Day War that happened in the 1960s. Israel was surrounded, 300,000 men to about 30,000. And it took Israel 6 days to win that war. Do you think God showed up? Of course he did. Well, listen. When word came to Abraham that Lot had been captured, he chose 318 of these men and few, from his allies, and they went out. And they defeated old Ched's army, and they rescued Lot, and they returned home through the King's Valley, and that's when God opened up another surprise for Abram. Number 3 opened up. Wait for it. This surprise was the God of surprises sent Melchizedek. Does anybody know what just happened? The thing is, I just said something very profound, and we needed to put clapping in the background in order for us to be. Are you excited? God sent Melchizedek. I thought you'd be on your feet clapping, but all of you are saying what everybody else is saying. Well, who in the heck is Melchizedek? Right? Did you think that, Doc? You see him just a couple times in the Bible, and who is he? Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine as Abraham's walking through the valley of the kings, and he was a priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abraham. Talking about opening of a gift, he blessed him, and he blessed him not only with his blessing, but blessing is going to come from the God Most High. I mean, it's anticlimactic if I come over to your house and bring a blessing from the next door neighbor, Charlie. This blessing is upon you from Charlie. And you're going, oh, joy. Charlie, and a quarter, I can buy a cup of coffee at Sambo's. You know what I mean? Isn't that something? God Most High, who delivered you from the armies, there was the key to the surprise number 2, that he went out with 318 men, because who was with him? Boy. But it's begging the question still, who is this priest king Melchizedek? Who is he? That title's never been bestowed on anyone in Israel's history. In fact, this man was not even part of Israel's history. You see, we have King David. Was King David a priest as well? No, just a king. He would go to a priest and talk to a priest about this and that, but never have we seen in Israel's history a priest and a king. But here, nestled away right in the book of Genesis, which means beginnings, we find a priest king walking through there, and here's what he did. Now, it says this in the Hebrews, which is in the New Testament. We've gone out of Genesis. We've come into the New Testament. Now this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High, met Abraham, king and priest. He was returning from defeating the kings, and he blessed him. To him also, Abraham apportioned a tithe of everything. The name first means king of righteousness, then king of Sodom, that is, king of peace. He was without father, without mother, without genealogy. He has neither beginning of days nor end of days, but like the Son of God, he remains a priest for all time. How many of you have ever read about Melchizedek in the Bible? Raise your hand. How many of you have been baffled about who he is? Shows up with a blessing and carrying blessings, bread and wine from the Most High. My goodness, that's a surprise. So who was he? Resume sounds an awful lot like someone we know. Maybe you have a guess as to who this could be in the Old Testament, but can it be? Could it be Jesus? Could Jesus have showed up in the Old Testament to give blessing and word to Abraham at a key place in his life about what the Most High God is about? And to continue to establish the blessing in this great man so that he may continue? You go, wait a minute, but Jesus wasn't born yet. No, he wasn't born yet. But Jesus said about himself, I am. He said, I was, and I always will be. So did he have to officially be born in order to be the Son of God and to live in heaven? I think not, because look at here, 7 super stupendous, simple, and yet stunning similarities. Do you like that? I put a little alliteration together for you because I love my peeps. Right? Anyway, first one is this. Melchizedek was a king. So was Jesus. Revelation chapter 19. Now, I've quoted out of Genesis. I've quoted out of Hebrews. And now I'm quoting out of Revelation. That pretty much sums up the whole Bible, doesn't it? The book of beginnings and the book of end. And right smack dab in the middle is Hebrews. So he has the Alpha and the Omega, and he's got the now taken care of. I love that. That is so good. So on his robe and on his thigh, he had this name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I'd like the band to come back. This is just about over already. So I want you to, any of you that are paused today, I want you to hit the play button right now. Hit that play button right now. If you're sitting at a stoplight right now, I want that to become a go light in your life. I want green lights to be flashing. I want you to hear this. Because Melchizedek was a high priest, so was Jesus. In Hebrews it says this, therefore, since we have a great, say it with me, high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. Melchizedek was a king of Salem. Salem is another word for the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem means what? It's the same as shalom. Yes, you knew that. Shalom. Shalom means what? Peace. Surprise, it's like the janitor who jumped out of the closet. Supplies, supplies. All right. For unto us a child is born, for unto us a son is given. The government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. Are you digging this? I didn't know this till I studied this. This is the way it's playing out. Melchizedek was known as the King of Righteousness. So was Jesus. Malachi chapter 4. This is a messianic scripture, which it's telling of the Messiah before he actually comes. It says, but to you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings. The Son of Righteousness. Who was that? That was Jesus. Wow. Melchizedek had no beginning or no end, and yet Revelation tells us about Jesus. I am the Alpha. I am the Omega. I am the first. I am the last. I am the beginning. I am the end, and I am the fairest of 10,000. Could it be? 6, notice who sent him to minister to Abraham. It was the Most High God. The blessing come to you when you hear about that. The Most High God, the creator of heavens and earth. It's the big guy who put everything together. If you are sitting here today, you're like 1 in a million, 1 in a billion chances that you are here today. He's the one that gave the nod for you to be a human being and get to experience good and bad, what you have experienced in your life. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." And 7 is, notice what he brought to Abraham, bread and wine. Where have we heard of this before? Bread and wine. Around Easter time, Jesus sitting with his disciples. What 2 elements does he bring out before his death? He brings out bread and he brings out wine. Jesus was born in a particular town of Bethlehem. Bethlehem means house of bread. Jesus came in front of the people and said, "I am the bread of life." Melchizedek shows up, doesn't have a mom, doesn't have a dad. He comes representing the Most High God, and he brings bread, a foreshadowing of what was going to happen later. And then wine meant transformation. So he brings the bread of life. And he brings transformation. What did Jesus bring? He brought bread so that you could feed and so that he knows he's not mad at you all the time. So you hear a message from God that he isn't mad at you all the time, that he doesn't want to squish you, that this God wants to open up another surprise for you. He wants smiles from you. He wants thanksgiving from you. He's there for you. And so, it definitely looks like Jesus, but wait for it. 2,000 years before his birth, 2,000 years before he officially came, the great I Am showed up in the book of Genesis to bless a man who would bless everyone in the world. So Abraham comes back from war, weary and worn. Total surprises him with a gift of blessing by sending Melchizedek to minister the good news to Abraham with the bread and the wine of blessing, and some interesting questions that we need to ask in closing. What's God saying specifically to you this Christmas season? What is God saying to your heart? It's easy to say, "Oh, I was in church today and I heard a good message," but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what is God saying to you. God isn't one that comes and puts pressure on you. God leads you. So what's he saying? And could it be that just as God sent Melchizedek to Abraham when he was weary and worn out from war and battle, that sometimes in the darkest hour of your life, God sends someone to minister to you? Listen. My son's father and mother-in-law were here this weekend, and about a year ago, they lost their son to a drug overdose. They've been praying for him for years. And he was one of those unfortunates that could never get out of it. His mom and dad, they believe in God, they love God, they prayed for him, but it just didn't work out for this son. God had something else in mind. And so one day when they're feeling really, really, really bad, they say, "Hey, let's go down to the brewery." Not a bad choice, right? Can somebody say amen to a brewery? Never thought I'd ever say that in my life in church. God doesn't go into breweries, does he? Well, they were sitting there and they were talking to friends, and friends were talking to them, and they were telling the story of Luke, and they were crying a little bit. When to the side, a girl walked in. She sat right over here, and as they were talking, the girl stood up and said, "I couldn't help overhearing what you were talking about." She said, "My name is Betsy, and I just came back from a missions trip, and I'm also an addictions counselor, and I couldn't help but overhear what you were saying." She said, "Could I pray for you?" And they just looked around. They said, "Here? At the brewery?" She said, "Especially here at the brewery." They said, "Sure." She placed her hands, and she didn't care who here heard this. Oh, dear God, bring a blessing to these parents who are dying every single day because their kid has died. These parents who think partially it's their fault. These parents who did everything they could for this kid, but it just didn't work out, and he died anyway of this. When she was all done, everybody's crying this deal, and God showed up in this brewery because the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who sent Melchizedek to a king who needed him, is the same God that sends Jesus to people who need him today. Can I get an amen on that? And he hasn't left you out. He hasn't left you out. So what could God be doing for you in this Christmas season? You have mountaintop experiences. You have a few valleys. And I guess I couldn't end this without one more clip from National Lampoon's Vacation, talking about mountains and valleys and light, and God is all about that. And so in this, they're all standing around on the top of a hill when Clark has discovered a super slick concoction that will make sleds go faster than they should. Take this into your Christmas season, and you come back and bring people to Christmas at the movies, and then you all sing a little bit. So proud of you all. God bless you.